If we can get somebody to sit down. He's still not listening. I agree. I know. I understand.
I can smack you.
Well, I can hit him. I can hit him. Well, we're glad you're here this evening. We appreciate it. It's good to see Marlene with us. I know why she's here, and I don't like it because she's here. So I like her being here, but I don't like her being here because I know that means that we're just a few days closer to him not being here and the rest of his crew, and that's not going to be a good day. I'm not looking forward to that at all. We've been coming here for, 40 plus years, 42 or something. 40. Okay, yeah, so we were here before that. So this man's been part of my life for a long time, and his whole family. I mean, we come here, and his great-grandpa's here, and his grandpa's here, and his dad, and we watched all the kids come up, and it's just not going to be the same. I know Becky still sits there, but it's just not going to be the same not having a group of Alleys up here in the front. So, again, I hope you're making plans to stay Sunday after services for a few minutes. He won't be able to stay very long because he is going to hop in a U-Haul truck and head to North Carolina Sunday after service. So, will you be here next Wednesday night? Will you be back? Okay, so we'll have one more opportunity next Wednesday night. So, yeah. So, please make an effort to make sure you get to speak to him, stick around Sunday, and have a few minutes with the family and everything. But we are glad that Marlene's here. We always appreciate her being here. But like I said, it's a sad situation that we have to say goodbye to him here pretty soon. We're going to start. We got a lot of material to cover. I kind of wish they didn't put all three of these books together the way they did. I understand why they did. We're going to look at Ezra, Nehemiah, and Esther. A lot of material in these three books. A lot of things happen in these three books that there's no way that we're going to get to cover very much of it in the 40 minutes that we have. I understand why they did it because, of course, Ezra and Nehemiah are kind of right there hand in hand. And what you might not realize as you read through this or study this, Esther falls in this same time period as well. Esther falls in somewhere around the 6th and 7th chapters of Ezra. So you've got all three of these books occurring, the history of them, the stories that's going on, all in that same time frame, same people involved. So I don't know if you realize that, didn't realize that. Some of Ezra, I've read through Ezra twice this past week, and Nehemiah and Esther once, and part of Nehemiah the second time. Ezra to me is a little hard to read and try to follow what's going on. And we'll talk about that in just a second. Before we do, we better pause for just a second and have a prayer before we get going. Brother Philip, would you lead us in prayer?
Father, we thank you for life. We thank you for everything you give us each day. We thank you, Lord, for the opportunity we have once again to come as your children, to study from your word, that we may be stronger servants in this life, and we may prepare for the next life to come. Be with us, Father, as we go through this class, and the things we do and say be according to your will. We ask it in Jesus' name. Amen.
And of course, Ezra was written by Ezra. It's kind of obvious on that one. Ezra is a descendant of Aaron, so you've got that lineage of him being a Levite priest. Because we know he's also a scribe, but he was also a priest. So he was both things. Ezra talks about is a continuation of the history of the Jewish nation and tells about their return out of captivity. And then some other things, of course, would go into it. But like I was saying, if you've read through Ezra, and if you haven't, go home and read through it. But when you look at Ezra chapter 1 and verse 1, the very first verse starts talking about we're in the first year of Cyrus, the king of Persia. So the Medes and the Persians have taken over, have conquered the Babylonians at this point in time, and Cyrus is the king. Well, then you skip on over to, and you got chapters 2, and chapter 2 goes into the list of the people that were in captivity and the names of them. And so you continue on over into chapter 4, And we still have Cyrus, who's king. No, I'm sorry. Let me back up here. I'm getting messed up here. You have Artaxerxes that comes into the scene. Of course, Cyrus gives the decree to Zerubbabel to go back to Jerusalem to build the temple back. And then Bologna. I didn't. Oh, here it is. Yeah, chapter 3 and about verse 6 and 7 talks about Ahasuerus in the days of Artaxerxes. So some point in through there, because even verse 3, chapter 4 and verse 3 still is talking about King Cyrus of Persia. Somewhere in there, he dies and Artaxerxes takes over. So then you go into that chapter for a while, into chapter 4 some, and in verse 23, you still read about King Artaxerxes' letter, but then in verse 24 it talks about the work at the temple was stopped by Artaxerxes, and it was stopped for 16 years until the second year of the reign of Darius, king of Persia. So now, somewhere in here, Artaxerxes has died and Darius takes over. Well, then you kind of continue on a little bit, and you go over into chapter 7, and chapter 7 verse 1 starts back with talking about Artaxerxes. So it goes through part of the story and then it goes back again and starts back through it again. So like I said, to me, Ezra was kind of a hard read. That was just me. Maybe you guys I know you guys are a lot smarter than I am, so maybe you didn't have as much hard a time with it. And Bill, of course, you got a head start on us. How many times have you taught Ezra? I know you've done it.
We taught Ezra, David and I, several years.
Yeah, because I've got notes that. Yeah.
So we did them both.
Yeah.
Now the biggest things from my memories of Ezra was just the date was kind of tough, but the biggest thing is how he basically tried to restore the law. He tried to get people's faith back. Of course, one of the big events is when he basically forced them to get rid of their foreign wives.
Mm-hmm.
And they repented and did.
Yeah.
It was pretty powerful.
Yeah, and we'll talk about that in just a second, a few minutes. That kind of goes with where we head to as we go into this. Of course, we talked about last week that Israel was divided, the north and the south. North got taken over by the Assyrians, the south got taken over by the Babylonians. About 100 years difference between when those two things occurred. And now we're up to a point of about 70 years after the Babylonians had taken over the southern kingdom. And so now the Babylonians have been conquered by the Medes and Persians. And all of this was prophesied back in Daniel. You can go back to Daniel and you can read about where Daniel prophesied about all this taking place. So in our questions and stuff, the book of Ezra continues Jewish history following the return from Babylonian and Assyrian captivity. It's the whole group. Yeah, exactly. So technically they were in Persian captivity now at this point in time. The Persians, the Medes and the Persians, and we'll read about this in a little bit, and if you've read through the books, you'll see that they were, if you could use the term better, they were a better group than the Assyrians and the Babylonians. They still were a real good group, but they were better than the others. Anyway, number 2, how long had it been since Isaiah had prophesied this? How many years?
About 200 years.
About 200 years prior to Cyrus being the king of Persia, Isaiah prophesies about this, and he said that they would free the Jews to return where? Back to Jerusalem, back to the land of Israel, the promised land, and all this. And we know when you read through Ezra that a lot of the people didn't go back. They'd been gone out of the promised land for 200 years or so. So you had generations that have lived and died. And so it's just like, John's boys, when they leave here, they'll have some memories of being here, but 40 years from now, they won't have a lot of memories about being here. So this really, even though it is home, it really won't be home to them. Same way with these people. These people have been away from the promised land for 200 years. They were used to where they were. They liked living where they were.
Remember, I brought that up in my lesson on Ezra. I some reason, Haman and Esther decided to stay.
Mm-hmm.
The others had gone, and I remember my point I made. It seemed like there were people like them who were more comfortable and were used to living in Persia.
Right.
And among those people, because they had no frame of reference for living in Jerusalem or living in
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah. There was that going back to the promised land didn't really mean anything to them.
It was what they were used to.
Yeah. We got stuff flying everywhere. Yeah. Good point. So as we go on in through Esther, we already talked about this. Who wrote most of Esther or much of it? Well, Ezra did. Pick that up. Yeah, that one's pretty easy. And we already talked about this. The work of Ezra, he was a priest and a scribe. He was a tribe of Levi. So number 5, Ezra and Nehemiah tell about what? The return from captivity. Yeah, the return from the Babylonian and Assyrian captivity. Number 6, the events in Ezra. Okay, so what's the 3 or 2 main events? There's a lot of events, but what's 2 of the main ones? What's the first one? The first group goes back to Jerusalem under who? Zerubbabel. Okay. Yeah, that's what I was going to say. Who was Zerubbabel? What was he? He was appointed by King Cyrus to be the governor of Judea.
He was found to be responsible for all the work that Cyrus had authorized to.
Yep. And again, King Cyrus is a pretty good king. He authorizes them to go back, allows them to go back. He says, not only can you go back, but I'm going to supply you with all the material to do everything with.
How you get it, he actually kind of coerced the provinces to supply them, and basically they picked stuff up as they went.
Yeah. The Israelites that didn't go back supplied, it was under Cyrus's decree or whatever, but yeah, they actually, the ones that did not go back supplied a lot of the materials, a lot of the gold, silver, a lot of the livestock that they took back that they would need for food and for their sacrifices. So that's the first. Okay, so the first group returns under Zerubbabel. So what's the second thing? The second group returns with Ezra. Ezra takes them back once the temple is completed and sets them up into worship again. Kind of goes back through the old law, reads back through the law, and directs them back into the proper way to worship. I think that's one of the questions we go on the next page here. Number 7. So who led the effort to rebuild the temple? Who was it? Zerubbabel. When was it dedicated? That's what I found, 516 BC. Now there's some leeway in there depending on who you look at, who you find that talks about it. I happened to Google it, and that's the one that popped up multiple times through Google.
The scripture says it took 23 years to finish it, but only 6 of those 23 years were they actually built it.
Right. Yeah.
So 17 years the work.
Yeah, 16 years the work stopped, and so it took 4 years after that to get the thing completed. So it was dedicated in 516 BC, 20 years to complete. The work was halted around 520 BC, so once it started, it took them about 4 more years to complete it. And there again, King Darius, we go through Cyrus, Artaxerxes, and Darius allows it to be redone, restarted. Artaxerxes shut it down for 16 years. And we know that he did that because as they were trying to build the foundations, all the people in that land around there, which actually were some of the Israelites that had intermarried with the Gentile people there, a large group of them now become the Samaritans that we read about in the New Testament. They and the Edomites were battling them constantly, harassing them about them building this back. They didn't want them to come back into that area. They didn't want them back in Jerusalem. And so they did whatever they could to disrupt the construction, went to the king Artaxerxes and said, hey, you got this group of people. If you go back in history and look, you'll see that this group of people has caused all the other kings nothing but problems. They fought them. They've battled against them. They've done this. They've done that. They haven't paid taxes to them. They made up all kinds of things Well, Artaxerxes did go back and look, and yeah, there was some record of them causing trouble, but not to the extent it was made out to be. But anyway, he thinks it's enough, and so he halts the work on the temple for 16 years. When he dies, then Darius comes on the scene, and Darius allows it to continue. Over on the second page, number 8, Ezra had what? Prepared his heart to seek the law of the Lord. And so he does this by, number 9, by helping to restore what? Start what? Statutes and judgments, okay? Anybody have anything different? Yeah, what I found and what I put down in there was he restored the temple worship. At this point in time, the temple is built. And so now he goes back, he takes this second group of people back, and they restore the actual worship. They go through, he restores the Feast of the Tabernacles. Zerubbabel takes a little over 42,000 men with him when they go back and start building the temple. Ezra takes 1,700 and I think 54 or 53 or some number in there, 1,700 some, to go back with Ezra when he goes back.
There was such an ignorance of the law among these people that no one had taught the law. No one had, it wasn't a part of their hearts. They were Hebrews, but they didn't really have any sense of what being a child of God was.
Yeah.
God's chosen people.
Yeah, that's exactly. It goes with the same thing as they didn't know anything about the promised land. They didn't have any connection to it. They didn't know really what it signified, what it meant. It just didn't mean anything to them. The law didn't mean anything to them at all. A lot of things going on. Like we said, Artaxerxes dies in this mix, and now we're under King Darius at this point in time. We went through Ezra pretty quick, but it kind of dovetails into Nehemiah. But is there any questions, any comments about Ezra? Anything anybody wants to say about Ezra? Again, he was a scribe, a Levite, wrote most of that book, or all of that book. He's also credited, we don't know for sure, but he's credited with 1st and 2nd Chronicles and probably even 1st and 2nd Kings. We don't know that for 100%. Nehemiah, this book is probably also written by Ezra. Again, no way to prove it 100%, but they kind of, Ezra being a scribe, that wrote the law down, wrote things down, and being that he lived in the same time period, they kind of worked hand in hand. Pretty good idea, pretty good bet that Ezra probably wrote that book. This says who wrote Nehemiah. Well, the material says Nehemiah, but it's actually probably was written by Ezra. So either answer, again, no real way of knowing 100% for sure. But what was Nehemiah? What did he do? He was a cupbearer to the king. Now, would you like to have that job? Well, it's a pretty good gig unless... Well, that's what he was. That's what he was. Yeah. Yeah. It was a pretty good gig because, like Bill says, he was, right next to the king. I mean, he had the king's ear. He was next to the king. He was with the king.
He was hearing everything and seeing what was happening.
Exactly. But if somebody's out to get the king and they want to poison his wine, well, Nehemiah is going to be the one that's going to take the fall, not the king, because that's what he did. He would pour wine in his left hand and drink it. If he didn't keel over, then it was okay for the king to drink it. That's what it said. Well, pretty good gig until somebody poisons his wine. Then, then the gig's up. But, yeah, right. Yep. Terrible benefits. Yeah. Could possibly be terrible benefits. Yeah. But that was his job. Again, he was an Israelite as well. So he was part of that group. And he had worked his way in, to be in close with the king there. So what's number 12? What's some of the events? Again, a lot of events in Nehemiah, but what's two of them that they had in here? What's the first one? Nehemiah returns to Jerusalem. This is the third return to Jerusalem. He has Zerubbabel, Ezra, and now Nehemiah goes back. So, And while he was going back, he is going to rebuild the walls of the city. Yeah. And when they get there, of course, we know when Zerubbabel gets there, you can read it in there, even talked about it, but we know from other accounts, the city, there wasn't anything left. The Babylonians had flattened that city. I mean, they had wiped it out. Cyrus even goes back into the Babylonian, into Nebuchadnezzar's storeroom or catch or whatever you want to call it, and he gets back out a lot of the things that Nebuchadnezzar had stolen out of the temple. And you can go back into Ezra there and you can read this whole list. I mean, so many thousand chargers and so many hundreds of this and that and everything. I mean, Nebuchadnezzar had wiped that place out and just destroyed it. And so there was just pretty much rubble left when they go back and they start rebuilding it. Number 13, how long did it take them to rebuild the walls? 52 days. And these aren't, our little 3.5-inch stud walls with drywall and maybe brick on the outside wall. These are massive walls. So obviously, who was with them? God. And the bingo. And when it was done in 52 days, the Samaritans, the Edomites, and everybody that was fighting against them knew that God was on their side.
And that was still occurring. You remember when we studied Nehemiah, we talked about the fact that a lot of them, they wouldn't necessarily complain to the Persians, but what they do is they would ridicule. Oh, you're not going to get that. It's too much of a problem. You're not going to get that. They basically ridicule them.
Yeah, well, they even tried to weasel themselves into it by saying, well, let us help you. Let's help you do that. And Nehemiah says, no way, people. You guys get lost. You are not helping us in any way, shape, or form. He knew what they were up to. Or God, and made sure that he knew what he was up to. Yeah. Again, just 4 questions there and 4 little things about Nehemiah, but there's so much more in Nehemiah that we could talk about. A lot of different things. But
it's a good explanation. It's protecting the church, and that's what the walls have protected the city. And there's things we can do spiritually to protect the church. Keeping out error, keeping out sin, keeping out anything that's going to hurt it.
Yeah.
I mean, there's
well, the wisdom of God fits right in there, and the way that He's structured how the congregation is to be governed. We have elders that are over this local flock. The elders of this flock, this congregation, even though they might be friends with elders at Flatwoods or South Point or Ironton or Rome or wherever, we don't have anything to do with what they do. Same way, kind of like the building, these walls here are kind of protected just like they do Jericho. But God has set up the church to be protected, each individual congregation, so that if one falls, they all don't fall. If one goes astray, they all don't go astray. Again, the wisdom of God in how the church is structured is amazing, really, when you really look at it.
Other applications, definitely having a common purpose. Those people work together. You didn't have people fighting each other or not participating. They all participated in some way.
Yep.
That is a great example for the church, and also just the idea of building in general. You never stop building. You never stop growing.
Yeah, same with us here. We can all participate in the work of this congregation. We all might not be able to go out and do different things and do that. How many of us can go across the seas, to a foreign land? Well, probably none of us. But through our giving of our funds, we can do that. So many ways that we can all work together, and just like they did back then, they all worked together. Some of them actually did the construction, some of them supplied the materials, some of them did this, and some of them did that. They all had a hand in it. Same way we can here. I mean, somebody's got to mow the grass, here. Somebody's got to do this. Somebody's got to do that. Somebody got to turn the lights on and off, lock and unlock the building. I mean, the list just goes on and on and on. And you don't realize how important how important everybody is until that one person that's doing that one thing isn't there to do it anymore. Jim Crum, look, and before him, Marshall Finch. Look at those men for years. made sure that, you know, we had 4 guys to do the communion, you know, serving every day. You know, we had, or on Sundays, you know, we had somebody who was going to do the prayer and song leading, you know, just making sure that just what was necessary for worship was covered. You know, they passed away, and it's like, man, you know, it takes 2 or 3 guys now to fill those shoes. You can just go on and on. I mean, B.J. Smith, I mean, people just don't realize how much B.J. Smith did that nobody even knew about until he was gone. It's like, oh, well, B.J. did that. Oh, well, B.J. did it. Oh, well, he did that too. It's like, wow. If you want something to do, come and talk to us. We'll find you something to do. There's plenty of things to do. Anyway, we're not going to do that. You got Kimberly to help you there. Okay. All right, so we're going to move into Esther. Esther, of course, we've talked about this book a little bit in the other part of the study that we went through. We don't know who wrote Esther, but good possibility it was Mordecai that wrote it. Just by the events, the time frame that this took place, in the same time frame that Ezra and Nehemiah is going on, good possibility that he wrote this. And like we said, this book of Esther falls in Ezra's chapter, somewhere in Ezra's chapter 6 and 7, somewhere in that time frame, because you read about Artaxerxes in there and some other things that's going on. So number 14, we got about 12 minutes. We'll get through this. What was the queen's name that was disposed of? Vashti, okay? Because why? Okay, she refused or failed to display herself before a group of, you said noblemen, I said drunks. Drunken men. They were pretty well out of it.
And the description of the party is amazing. I mean, it was days.
Yes, this was not just a Saturday night, you know, let's have a few beers kind of a party. This lasted for days, actually for a week or so, wasn't it?
And it talked about the decorations and things like that.
Yeah.
It was just elaborate.
Now, what's possible about this, and it depends on what commentary you look at, who you kind of read after. So take this for what it's worth. There's a good possibility that Queen Vashti is pregnant at this time with Artaxerxes, who is next in line to be king. So what this means is, of course, she refuses to go in front of these men and dance or whatever they wanted her to do. It was something lewd, I'm sure. It wasn't appropriate. And especially, well, not even especially, but if she was pregnant, I'm sure, you know, she definitely didn't want to. And maybe it wouldn't even have felt like it. But anyway, so when she is no longer queen, and we know that Esther, the next question, Esther becomes queen of Persia. So Esther now is queen to she's queen anyway to
Artaxerxes.
Well, Artaxerxes would be her stepson. Pardon me? Yes, and his same name is is X, Xerxes, not Artaxerxes, but Xerxes. And you'll also see his name as the other one. I didn't write it down. Yeah, Artaxerxes means son of Xerxes. So anyway, Esther would be Artaxerxes' stepmom. So that's, again, how it all kind of ties in here together at the same time frame. Okay, enough of that. So up on the next page, number 16, who was Esther's cousin? Mordecai. And of course, we know what has happened to Esther's parents. They're dead, aren't they? She's an orphan. She has no other relatives. So Mordecai basically takes her in and raises her as his own daughter, but really the cousins. For some reason, I thought it was an uncle, but it's cousins. Anyway. Yeah. Okay.
So it says here back to Artaxerxes, that's kind of like the name president of Pharaoh.
Mm-hmm.
It's more of a title than a name.
Yeah, I got another note someplace. Let me find this real quick. Here's what I want to talk to. Ahasuerus would be the king, which is the same as the name Xerxes, Xerxes. So he was king of Persia, and which would be the same king that is spoken of in Ezra and Nehemiah. And there's a transliteration when the Bible was translated, I guess, of Hebrew into our language or whatever. And so you'll see, and that's another reason why it's kind of hard to read some of Ezra and Nehemiah and Esther and try to piece it all together, because you have these different names, but they are one and the same. So this transliteration, all it is it's a process of transferring a word from the alphabet of one language into another language. So you're trying to translate a word out of English into Spanish or Spanish into English. And if you look at some of those words, sometimes they look almost the same in Spanish, some of the English words, but then some of them are completely way off. But that's how we have some of these different names of these kings at this point in time. They are one and the same when you go back and piece it all together. So number 17, the events in Esther. The first one is, of course, that Esther becomes queen. We know this is a year-long process. They have all these women from the area come in, and they stay in the palace. They go through this kind of like a beauty school, a prep school kind of a thing. They're brought one at a time before the king, and he sees all of them. He meets all of them, talks with all of them, all that kind of stuff. God's hand, again, in this, God's providence, again, is in this, that you can definitely see as you read through this book, because Esther stands out among the rest, as they say.
I'm pretty sure, I haven't studied Esther deeply in a while, but I don't think God's name is mentioned.
It is not. That's a good point. Yeah. Jehovah God is not referenced at all. Oh, yeah. Yeah. But his hand is definitely in there. Under 17b, what was the next thing that occurred in Esther? Haman's plot, yeah. Haman, and we'll talk about him down 18, so let's get to the next one. So C, what's the other part that happens in there? The Jews were delivered. Esther saves the day, saves the people. So Haman, let's talk about Haman. Haman was
Agag guy.
Yeah, Agag guy. There you go. Agag guy. However you say that. He was also a top official. I mean, he was right there with the king. I mean, he was what? He was a big baby. He was full of himself for sure, wasn't he? I mean, he thought of himself very, very highly. Pardon me? I didn't say, okay. Well, yes, he had what I used to call Runts disease. And if you want to know what that is, come see me after service, and I'll let you know what Runts disease is. He was a top official. He was a very proud man. He sought to destroy the Jews. Verse 1 out of chapter 3 talks about that he was set above all the princes of this area, of this kingdom. So, he was elevated high by the king in his role in the kingdom.
Besides his hatred of Mordecai, because Mordecai wouldn't doubt him, wouldn't show him respect, a lot of his hatred of the Jews may have gone back in his ancestry, because remember the Jews defeated his ancestors when they were traveling in the wilderness.
Yeah. And I don't know that Mordecai, we're not really told, I don't know that Mordecai was necessarily disrespectful to him, other than he would not bow to him. But just like, if he walked by him, maybe he said hi, bye, I don't know, but we definitely know that he did not bow to him. He did not give him that respect that Haman wanted.
I think some people think he thought that Haman wanted to be worshipped in a way. Because you'll see like Daniel and other guys bow to other kings, but it's more of a term of respect. And some people think that Mordecai, that Haman to be worshipped. And I don't know. That's probably just speculation.
Yeah.
That would make sense.
Sure. Yeah, it would. Okay. All right, we got just a few more minutes to get through the rest of this, which is probably pretty easy there. So the events in the life of Esther demonstrate the beauty and power of God's what? Providence. Absolutely. No question about it. And we've talked about this many times. There's so many events in our own lives as we go through it, we don't really understand it, see it. We don't really, grasp the whole picture. But you look back, a few days later, a few weeks, a few months, a few years, and you say, boy, that sure does seem like God's providence was in that. We have no way of knowing for sure, but
These words are beautiful because in essence, Mordecai tells Esther, perhaps you've been put in this place for a reason.
yeah,
There's a reason why you're where you are.
yeah. And Mordecai just lays it on the line to her, says, hey, you're in this spot, look at all these things that happened in your life. There's a reason that you're where you are right now in this particular point in time. And if you don't choose to do this, somebody else or something else will take place. But, you need to grasp the situation, understand the situation. Something's going on here. You're here for a special reason.
Work 7 billion people at the same time as well.
Yeah.
He does every day.
Yeah. It is. It's staggering when you think about the capabilities of God and when you really try to understand it. We all joke around the movie about, I can't think of the name. I've never seen the whole thing, but George Burns, is he God? Oh, God, yeah. Yeah. And then the other one about, I can see his face. Not Carrie. Pardon me? Yeah, Bruce Almighty. He's receiving all the prayers from everybody or whatever. He's getting tired of answering all the prayers, and he's sitting there on his computer and he just starts clicking yes, 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 yes. Man, chaos just starts happening in the world. But when you think about God, just like Jeff said, there's 7 billion people in the world, and God. Well, yeah, probably 8 now. Who knows how many? But anyway, God knows every one of us. He knows the number of hairs on each one of our heads. He can hear all of us. If every one of us, if every one of the 8 billion were able to pray and our prayers were received by God, which we can talk about that later. We know that not everyone's prayers are received by God, but he has the capabilities of hearing everyone's prayers and responding to everyone's prayer at the same time. It's unbelievable when you really think about how awesome God is and his capabilities.
He knows the number of hairs on your head and what you're thinking.
Oh, and this, and. He's all knowing. He just he knows what we're going to think about before we even think about it. You can just go on and on and on about God.
I think it's more powerful about God that he can work his will out without altering our free will, without doing a miracle. I think that's more powerful than a miracle.
Yeah.
It's almost inexplainable to explain a miracle.
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
It's just, blows my mind.
Yeah, it does. The last question there, and I don't think we need to, we're out of time anyway. We all know what these books of Moses and the history are. It's Genesis all the way to Esther. I apologize that we go through this so quick, but they give us a lot of material to cover, and there's so much more that we could say about all of these things. And as always, if there's anything you want to bring up, speak up, or we'll hit it next week if there was something that you wanted to say and you didn't get to say it. So I appreciate all your comments, and we'll jump into number 7 next week.
anything else like that.